Hey guys, what's up? MadSeason here, back with another video in my cut content series. I got 10 more things I want to show you that were removed from the game for one reason or another, so let's get into it. Just a quick note before we begin though, all of this was taken from a pretty popular list online from an MMO champion user by the name of Paladin. So all credit goes to him, I'm just the guy making a video about it and going into a little more detail. If you want to see the original list though, I'll have a link to it in the description. So let's start with the original Hellfire Peninsula and Outlands. You all know the one we have today, but during Vanilla there was a very early alternate version of it, and it was accessible by glitching through the Deadmines instance. It's been fixed now, so I can't show you video footage, but as you can see here, there still exist screenshots of it. These floaty trees with the chasm in the middle was a very early Hellfire Peninsula. It was supposed to be a max level zone in Vanilla, but was later saved for the Burning Crusade expansion. And if you want to go further, there was a more developed version in the map files. Although it wasn't accessible by players, it was pretty developed, even having the actual dark portal in it. There does exist some footage of this, but none that I own. Another YouTube user by the name of Haven Games has a video showing it all off in detail, so if you're curious, I'll have a link to that in the description. It's pretty cool stuff. Next up, we have the Tauren Plains running ability. In the early stages of the game, it was planned that the Tauren race wouldn't be able to use mounts. Instead, upon reaching level 40, they would unlock the ability called Plains Running. What you would do is use it, and it would take 10 seconds of uninterrupted running to gain a gallop, which would boost your movement speed to that of a normal level 40 mount, which was 60%. And when you hit 60, you would get a better one where the boost was 100%. It was removed for a variety of reasons. The biggest problem was if you got hit at all, you lost it. You can get dismounted with normal mounts, but it's only when you get dazed. So just getting hit period was super annoying to deal with. Another problem was if you stopped moving, you would of course lose your gallop and you would have to regain it all over again. And worst of all, it could kick in at the wrong time, causing you to rush into groups of enemies by accident. So, due to all of these problems, they eventually just took it away and gave them the Kodo mount instead. An echo of it did make it in the Cataclysm expansion though. The Worgen race has the Running Wild ability, which is kinda similar to Plains Running, in looks at least. Next, we have a 3-in-1, and that's the various city changes. Starting with the Undercity, there was actually supposed to be a second floor to this. You can still access it just by using a flying mount, but as you can see, you have these balconies, one for each wing of the city, with little pathways and skull bridges connecting them. The stairs leading to this area were removed because they thought that it might be too confusing to navigate, but you can still see where they would have had vendors and trainers and whatnot. Instead, they just moved them one floor down and cut this area out altogether. And we also have the fact that Gnomeregan was going to be an actual city instead of a dungeon. This would of course be the gnome capital, and there would have been an elevator that connected it to the dwarf capital, Ironforge, similar to how the Deep Run tram connects it to Stormwind. The reason this was scrapped was because it would have created a faction imbalance. The capital cities in Vanilla were Stormwind, Ironforge, and Darnassus for Alliance, and Orgrimmar, Undercity, and Thunderbluff for Horde. So, instead of completing it and turning it into a city, it was turned into the 5-man dungeon that we have today, and the gnomes moved in with the dwarves in Ironforge, getting their own district at least. And we also have the old Ironforge from the alpha. Similar to the Undercity, the old Ironforge had a second floor. The general architecture remained the same, but it was just way bigger. But due to the same reasons for the Undercity, they removed the second floor because they felt it was too confusing to navigate. Another thing that changed was the Great Forge in the middle of the city. It used to actually resemble a giant forge, but was changed for one reason or another. Once again, footage of this does exist if you want a closer look. I'll have a link to it in the description. Next, we have the fact that there used to be two different types of shields. They were split up into heavy-duty shields and the less cumbersome but weaker bucklers. The reason they did this was because rogues and hunters used to be able to equip the bucklers, so they could still have a defensive edge if they needed it, but it would still fit the character by keeping their apparel lightweight. You can still see evidence of this with some of the older items. Some explicitly state that they're bucklers and others are shields, and the design of course matches that. But in the end, they felt that it wasn't roguelike or hunter-like to be able to equip an offhand buckler, and they didn't want to just throw out all of the work they did with those, so they just changed their armor type to shield instead. And on a similar note, the cloaks also worked a little differently. If you played during Vanilla, you may have noticed an overabundance of cloaks in the game. From quest rewards to drops, they were everywhere. That's because they used to have an armor type just like your other pieces of gear. You would have cloth, leather, and mail cloaks, and certain classes were restricted to certain ones. Once again, you can still see evidence of this in the names. Some are cloth cloaks and others are leather and chain. Next, we have Shara and Vanilla. This one is kind of half and half cut content since the zone is fully finished now, but in Vanilla, this zone was a ghost town for the most part. It was supposed to be a fully fledged max level zone, but halfway through they decided to abandon it due to its poor geographical design. This zone had a giant canyon in the middle, and with no elevators or anything obvious to traverse it easily, it was a nightmare to navigate. They realized this only after completing a majority of it, so they decided to abandon any sort of questing experience in the zone. There were still a few quests that sent you there, and also an outdoor raid boss, but other than that, they just left it. They later came back to it during the Cataclysm expansion though, and made it into a zone with actual stuff to do. Next up, we have something that really isn't cut content I guess, but rather cut design directions. And that's the fact that Discipline Priests were originally supposed to be a melee spec. Sort of similar to a Paladin, but more on the caster side, still with the ability to melee down enemies. This is evidenced by their old Inner Fire spell, which used to give them armor and attack power, which was useless for spellcasting. It would have been similar to the old monks and zealots from the old Scarlet Monastery instance. Some of their talents also pointed in that direction, but in the end, it just became an alternate healing spec, focusing more on shields and self-preservation, which made it pretty good in PvP in fact. While we're on the subject of weirdly designed specs, let's talk about the Enhancement Shaman. We all know the Shaman today. Elemental is for spellcasting DPS, Restoration is for healing, and Enhancement is for melee DPS. Well, Enhancement was actually supposed to be a tanking spec. If you played them during Vanilla, you may remember that a lot of their spells had threat generation tied to them, Earth Shock, Rockbiter Weapon, etc., and they even had totems that drew aggro and another one that increased their armor. If you look at their Alliance counterpart, it makes sense too. The Paladin had 3 specs clearly defined: Retribution for DPS, Holy for healing, and Protection for tanking. Being the Horde mirror to that, it would make sense that they would be capable of all 3 roles as well, by design at least. But due to only being able to equip male armor and having no real taunt made them pretty mediocre tanks, and they just turned into a melee DPS spec that pulled a little more threat than normal. Next, we have the original female troll model in the alpha. This was, yeah, frightening. I mean, what can I really say about this? Words kind of escape what I'm looking at here. They look like male trolls with a wig on. Female trolls were up there on the least played even after their makeovers, so I can only imagine what it would be like if this was their final model. Anyways, lastly we have player housing. This was very briefly introduced in the alpha, and it was scrapped pretty quickly as well. You were supposed to be able to pick from a few different house types, one for humans, one for orcs, dwarves, etc., to have a little place to hang out. But one of the main reasons it was removed, as you can see by the screenshot, was because you were able to put your house anywhere, even blocking off important areas of the game. And even still, with the amount of players, the world is much too small to be able to do something like this. Other games that did this, such as Star Wars Galaxies, had huge planets with a lot of empty space, but not so much in World of Warcraft. So, the whole thing was scrapped. We did of course get a variation of this later on with the garrison system in Draenor, however. But that's it. Those are 10 things that didn't make it to World of Warcraft. Pretty interesting stuff. Like I said, if you want to see more, I'll have a link to that list in the description, and this is an ongoing series. I'll be sure to revisit it every now and then, so keep an eye out for those videos if you liked it. Anyways, I hope you found the video helpful, like it if you liked it, and thanks for watching. Peace.